Welcome to the Logistics Point interviews. Today I'm joined by Paul O'Donnell, who is the Public Affairs Director at the Institute of Export and International Trade. And we're going to talk about exports and also the Export Monitor. Paul, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks very much for having me, Nick.
You just said the Export Monitor. So can you just give us a bit more information on what is it and why do we need it? What are the benefits?
The Export Monitor is a new data set that's being made available by the Institute of Export and International Trade, along with our partner Coriolis Technologies. What it's doing is looking at UK exporters nearly in real time, so that we'll be able to publish this data in the first week of the month, immediately succeeding the month for which we've got the data. This data, as I said, that Coriolis and ourselves have pulled together from a whole range of different sources, and it should provide a really, really interesting insight into what's happening in terms of UK exports in a much more quick form than the ONS data, for example, is able to produce.
And if you're looking into the data, what is it showing? Is it good? Is it bad?
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting picture. Of course, what we've published this month and will continue to publish is effectively 12 months of data. So you can see the numbers of exporters in the UK really, really shooting up, frankly, in February and March of 2021. Now, that's because companies started to become quote-unquote exporters for the first time after the end of the transition period. So companies that had previously only been exporting into the EU or sending their goods into the EU, and so weren't really considered exporters, became so. So we had this huge jump in the number of companies. It's from around about 40,000 to around about 65,000-ish exporters. And what we've seen since that point has been a very measured and steady drop off from those high points, that high point that we reached in March, as companies are perhaps correcting. Perhaps companies who were exporting have decided that they're not going to. And actually, probably in quite a lot of cases, supply chains and logistics chains have moved so that companies are perhaps using different parts of the supply chain. So rather than sending their goods or services directly to the EU, they're perhaps more likely to use somebody else within the UK who is then exporting on their behalf. And you can see that in the data. It's not a hugely dramatic drop, but it is sustained over the 7 or 8 month period. Interestingly, in the last month for which we've got the data, January, there was actually a little uptick. So that's perhaps telling us that things are perhaps settling down as companies are starting to get to grips with the new trading environment that they're finding themselves in, and actually also that as sort of some of the global supply chain pressures, which are still there, but which were really perhaps being felt more acutely in the autumn, are unwinding slightly.
Logistics is going micro. Smaller orders, smaller spaces, but big opportunities. Join us on the 8th of March online to talk about the changing face of the urban warehouse. Micro-fulfillment will take the central stage, and experts from Parcelli, Vizier, Mango Logistics, Cranfield School of Management, and Pots and Us will share real-life stories and advice on how to create a small, urban space that can fulfill orders better, faster, and cheaper. Micro-fulfillment and warehousing online conference on the 8th of March by the Logistics Point. Register now.
And is it possible for us to do some to see what's going to happen in the future with exports at the moment? What are the expectations?
I think there's a whole range of different scenarios that might pertain on exports. I mean, we can see, and we would hope that companies within the UK are increasingly looking to global markets, either as to replace potential EU markets, or actually because having now become an exporter, because they've had to learn about some of the documentation, some of the process, some of the tax implications, through having to bring those things in order to keep their trade with the EU going. Actually, suddenly it doesn't look quite so daunting a prospect to export to other parts of the world. That said, there remain challenges within the global supply chain, or within a whole range of different global supply chains, and that there's geopolitical risk at the moment as well.
And speaking about risks and what's having the biggest impact on trade, not only for the UK, but also, I guess, globally? Do you think it's COVID and in the UK's case, Brexit, or is it this geopolitical uncertainty?
I think it's been very hard to separate the effects of COVID and Brexit in the UK. That doesn't mean that they haven't had two slightly different sets of effects. More that it's all taken place at the same time. Mm-hmm. So, while companies, if you go and talk to individual exporting companies, they can tell you, well, that's COVID, that's a Brexit issue. Actually, if you're looking across the aggregate data, the signals to some extent perhaps slightly cancel or actually slightly amplify each other. So it's quite hard to really do that. But we can see that in the data that we've produced, that there were substantial fluctuations in 2020, which were largely COVID, certainly in the early part of the year. We can then see that there were other fluctuations at the very end of the year that reflect some of the stockpiling that took place pre the end of the transition period. And then that went through into January 2021, where volumes were quite low. But again, January 2021 was also when the UK went back into a fairly full lockdown. So there's a COVID effect there. Things started to come back quite quickly, or quite strongly in February and March, and then since then we've seen this sort of plateauing to slight decline, and which is a result of global supply chain issues, which were initially caused by COVID, but have now become a lot more complicated, and probably some Brexit effects as well in terms of exports to the EU. And particularly from smaller companies as well. So
is it that smaller companies, you just said smaller companies, are they the one that are really feeling the impact of all of these events together?
You would expect that they are less able to ride out some of the shocks that happen in normal economic times or normal economic life than larger companies. When you've got those very large shocks, it does hit smaller companies more. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that their overall economic activity is decreasing, but their export patterns may be shifting slightly. They may be, as I said, perhaps selling to another business within the UK that's then aggregating that and exporting, and eventually we will be able to track that.
Well, Paul, thank you very much for your time. For everyone watching, you can learn a bit more about this topic in the description down below. Thank you.